Brother Clay, I'm sorry, do we have screwdrivers here?
We have a couple, yes.
So we could get these put up. If they're towel holders put up.
Okay, I'll see what they might be Phillips, they might be
Okay, all right.
common, or
I
they,
think these are Phillips. Oh, there's like.
are they little big ones?
Yeah, little tiny screws.
And we may or may not have one with them. I wonder what you saw.
So we won't be turning on the fans this morning. Happy, not quite winter yet. Got a few weeks until that, but good morning. Good to be with you. Happy December 8th of 2024 and welcome to our adult Sunday school class. Good to have all you folks in person and Sister Lou online with us. And we are in the book of Exodus, chapter 19. So going through Exodus, we, the whole Bible timeline, we are in the year 1446 BC, Middle Bronze Age to be now with the early Hyksos there in Egypt. We'll talk more as we go. China still being led by Emperor Y Ren of the Shang dynasty. Egypt is in that second intermediate period where right now it's split. We've got invaders of the north and now Pharaoh. Well, let me back up and go to the natives first. Egypt's native 13th dynasty has, with the loss of Pharaoh Dudamos II in the Exodus Sea and the invasion of the Amalekites Hyksos, they've now been pushed further south. And the 13th dynasty, as of 1446 BC, is now being led by Pharaoh Ibi something Mater. The name gets caught up in there. And so again, 13th dynasty in the south, while in the north, these Amalekite and Hyksos mixed folks come on in. These early Hyksos currently being led by Pharaoh Nubuseri Yaamu. And that is the 14th dynasty now up there in the north, while the 13th is in the south. Babylon in the Bible lands being led by Amidatana, hammered by his great-grandson. The Lord's people coming up to Mount Sinai are in the line of Christ, tribe of Judah. They have Aminadab, I'm putting at about 98 right now. His son Nahshon, I'm putting at about 39. He is the leader of the tribe of Judah. He's the 28th generation of Adam. He will be grandpa to Boaz. So we have arrived on day 60 of their travels, which would be the 15th day of the third month. They left on the 15th day of the first month. So it's like from January 15th to March 15th, the 60 days. So too for them from the first to the third month on the 15th, about 60 days. For us would be about Sunday, June 21st of 1446 BC when they arrive here at Sinai. So that brings us to Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 and 2. Let's refresh those. In the third month, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. Finally, they have arrived. So what we will do as we were taking a look at Mount Sinai, we will continue our next look at sections of the film Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2, looking at this specific mountain. Let's see, we want, yeah, that one. We want, let's see. There we go. Yeah, that's what we want. So looking at the next section of film, Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2, taking a look at this mountain being considered as the one they have arrived at. So right now, looking at different items of evidence, and right now we left off with the Israelites complaining about being thirsty and considerations for the rock there at Horeb.
Eric, could you turn this kind of a glare? Could you just maybe turn these backlights off?
Yes, I can. English. Okay, the backlights are.
Yeah, just maybe the ones that we're.
These right here?
These here, whatever these.
Those there.
Immediate one.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
The one in front of the screen.
Or the ones in front of the screen.
The one, those up in front, on our side of the screen.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, there was
That's-
two.
yeah,
There was
the track
the
light.
track light.
How about this?
You want a pin?
We didn't need all.
Oh, guess
That's
what?
better. Yeah, that's fine. We didn't need everything.
All righty, now we're cooking with gas. So let's take a look here. Next section of Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2.
So Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go.
If I'm doing archaeology, the first thing I do is go to a place like this. First thing I do, I'm looking, I'm going, wow, let's go. Anybody in the Bronze Age would be attracted to high places and pillars. So, it's a very attractive place. Let's go.
Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Horeb, and you shall strike the rock. Water will come out of it, and the people will drink. The psalmist says, God split the rock in the desert, and water flowed as abundant as the sea, and it streamed down from the rock in rivers.
I was standing there in the split looking down, and the channels that came out went to the right and to the left. So we ended up with 4 major flow paths.
When our group came to this location, even from a distance, I knew this was a special place. There was evidence of ancient activity, including hut circles all around the site. Rephidim was also where the Israelites were attacked by the Amalekites. Moses went to the top of a hill, and whenever his hands were raised, Israel prevailed. But when he grew tired, the Amalekites prevailed. So Aaron and Hur helped Moses keep his hands raised until they had won the victory. The Caldwells found numerous sling stones in the area. Were these connected to a great battle? As amazing as the split rock seems, it's not on Glenfritz's route.
I really was impressed with the landmark when I saw it, but we have to fit in 8 campsites between the crossing from the sea and the wilderness of Sinai. And the location of the rock that you're talking about is too close to the beginning of the route to be able to squeeze in all of those places.
He also believes the erosion was due mainly to wind, not water.
There's one thing that I'm absolutely positive of: water, wind, whatever kind of erosion notwithstanding. That one rock is a very unique characteristic of that entire region. What has always hit me more than saying there's water or wind erosion, look at all the water that came from this rock, is when the Bible refers to the rock at Horeb. This was some kind of an ancient landmark that the Bible is speaking of. And in the Psalms, it talks about the Lord cleaving the rocks in the wilderness. The word there for cleave means to divide evenly, as in split right down the middle. It's the strangest rock that I've ever seen, and it's split right down the middle.
Opponents have another argument against the distance to this mountain. It's the travel speed required.
We read that it was a large number of people. They have animals, flocks, and herds. They have old people. They have children. If you try to get them to Saudi Arabia, they cannot make it in 60 days.
Well, in my opinion, the other candidates are actually too close. Some of them actually would require the Israelites to travel as little as 3 miles a day. Well, the scriptures say that the Israelites left in haste. We know that they had the pillar of cloud, which gave them shade during the day, gave them light at night, so they could travel much longer at night and longer during the day. Everything about the Exodus was supernatural. It was miraculous.
They lacked nothing. Their clothes did not wear out, and their feet did not swell. And there was none among his tribes who stumbled.
With 45 to 60 days stipulated by the Bible for the journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai, the various routes to Jebel Alas would result in an average travel speed from about 8.5 to 11 miles a day. This is about half the speed a caravan typically traveled. When scoring the journey to the mountain step for Jebel Alas, each view chooses a route based on assumed travel distances within the chronological markers given in the Bible. There have been different suggestions for the campsite of Elim, and some of these sites still contain large groups of palms with 12 wells, just as described in the Bible. The Hebrew approach claims that it makes more sense having the second camp of Yam Suf on the same body of water with the same name as the one that was miraculously crossed. The Caldwells identified a distinct landmark of a split rock along with stone circles and sling stones that they believe matches the events at the Rephidim camp. And with a travel speed of 8.5 to 11 miles a day, the Israelites, following the pillar of cloud and fire, could have reached Jebel Alas in the time the Bible gives for the journey. As with all the mountain candidates, there are other details that could be covered. Even so, these three routes all seem to have aspects that fit the biblical text. During my conversation with Steve Rudd, he shared a significant spiritual connection with the journey to the mountain.
There are Jewish literary sources that actually say that God came down on the mountain and gave Moses the 10 Commandments on Pentecost.
And that's 50 days.
Yeah. The entire Exodus is one big messianic prophecy. I'll call my son out of Egypt is applied to Christ. We've got the crossing of the Red Sea being baptized into Moses. The serpent on the pole, and Jesus in John 3 just said, that was a messianic prophecy of me. The Jews at that time looking forward, it was a mystery. But we Christians looking back, we can see it in the 50 days from Passover to Mount Sinai, where it connects the important messianic synchronism with God giving the law of Moses on Pentecost and in Acts chapter 2. The church getting the law of Christ on the day of Pentecost through the mouth of Peter.
I find this connection between the Old and New Testament fascinating, where the God of the universe comes in fire to meet his people. And in these divine and holy connections, there is worship. The next step is Midian. Based on everything I've seen, Jebel Alas would either be in or very near the land of Midian. But there's more. It has to do with the town of Al-Bad. There's a tradition that claims Moses and his father-in-law Jethro lived at Al-Bad. There is another explorer who is drawn to investigate the Exodus events. Dr. Sung-Hak Kim, South Korean, spent over 20 years in Saudi Arabia as the personal physician to the Crown Prince of Mecca.
Well, once I visited Al-Bad governor office, he became my friend. And we have tea together. It's very friendly with him.
The Saudi official told Dr. Kim that the caves at Al-Bad were connected to Jethro.
It was the small hill, is a whole completely locked, but the ancient time they digged it out, they made a cave. No one allowed inside, but I entered inside, a special letter from the governor. When I go inside, it's really amazing. It's very old house still there.
Notice that the Saudi archaeologists are saying this dates back to the 2nd millennium BC. That's the time of the Exodus. And who occupies this area, these caves, according to the Saudis? The Madian tribe. That's the Midianites. And the archaeologists are confirming that this area, which is known locally as the land of Jethro, was in fact occupied by a Midianite tribe. And these caves behind me were part of that habitation of the area. So what this means is that when Moses fled Egypt, like the Bible describes, to Midian, where did he come to? The likeliest spot is right here.
Dr. Kim was also surprised by this revelation.
Okay, you have the Jethro house. What else do you have? He said from Jethro house, 1 kilometer house in front of the Jethro house, you can see there is Ein Musa. It means the Moses well is there. Even local people up to now, they call it the Moses well. What we have here in the medium, in Arbat area, everything is available here. The governor himself, he talked like that.
The challenge is there are toponyms or place names matching the biblical events in both Arabia and the Sinai Peninsula.
The question then is, are these names being given to these places because of the story of Exodus later? The Arabs are very fond of doing that, establishing a name like Ain Musa or Jebel Musa or whatever it is, relating it to the story.
There's a well of Moses over here and there's a well of Moses over here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when do these names get attached to these places is the question. We don't have any evidence before, say, the 3rd or 4th century AD.
Some scholars suggest this site was only connected to the Nabatean people. They carved spectacular dwellings and tombs out of rock formations in this region and in Petra. But the Nabateans lived more than 1,000 years after the Midianites. That would be a problem for Jethro of the Bible. Dr. Yuri Zards was in charge of the Archaeological Survey of Saudi Arabia, allowing him access to the same location. He thinks there's clear evidence for the Midianites at El Bad.
That's Jethro as well. Notice there's a structure around here. I took that picture. You know, I'm just looking at it, and if you want to see that huge hole in the ground is a Midianite well associated with Jethro, and you can say, well, the Bedouin are misguided. It's really just Nabatean and Day or something like that. But we have found Midianite sherds there. So if you found late Bronze Age sherds, that proves that the area was being occupied and there was a magnet for water there in the late Bronze Age.
And that's where we will pause for this morning's segment. Get the lights for y'all. So any reactions, thoughts, or questions to that next section of the film?
I never knew there was such a rock as that.
Never knew there was such a rock as
I
that.
mean, that never was in my and experience or anything. I never knew that.
You know, they're talking about how many days or how many miles they could travel in a day in these different camps. It got me thinking, if you got that many people strung out in herds of animals, did they all camp?
At the same time.
You know, the first group starts camping, then they gotta wait for the rest of them to catch up, or they just stop at a certain time where they're at. They could be miles apart from each other.
Great question. So Brother Clay asked, so with a group this large, taking up so much space themselves as a unit as they're traveling, when they quote unquote camped, was it a case of the guys at the head stopped and then everyone caught up, or they just all stopped at the same time and were just spread out over the spread? The 2.5 million people, 600,000 men plus women and children, definitely exceeded the occupancy of the Motel 6. And so what we have to work with here to answer Brother Clay's question is, it looks to me that specifically the spots mentioned in the scriptures for campsites were places that were large enough to accommodate 2.5 million people. And that's one of the considerations for where is Mount Sinai, because 2.5 million people spent a year plus right there at the base of the mountain. So you've got to not only have room for them to park, but room for their herds and, water and all these different things. And that's what we're going to see here for this candidate for Mount Sinai. So it looks like, scripturally speaking, to answer your question, those the head of the pack stopped and the others caught up and they were all camped together at that spot. So it had to be a place that could accommodate. which is why they had to keep moving to get to these certain places, which Moses was again familiar with because he lived in Midian for 40 years and would take the annual trip around to the backside to bring his flocks for taking care of them. So does that help with that? Any other reactions, thoughts, questions?
So there was definitely, I mean, there was coordination.
Coordination,
This was
absolutely.
not- Yeah, there were,
Walkie-talkies.
yeah, absolutely.
Do you think,
I bet leaders could be true.
now what, the, caves and the well, then what country is that in?
Saudi Arabia,
What is their religion?
Islam.
Islam. And they got proof, they're backing up Christ or the Bible. Why are they Islamic? Why won't it, they're on the Quran, right?
Yes. So there's a difference between what people are seeing and what government is recognizing. And we'll see that as we go with another location related to this as well. The official government story versus what lies a little further under the surface, literally digging deeper. Sister Ashley.
So is this definitive? Is this, or are there, because because you hear them say, you hear the archaeologists say, well, this makes sense to us,
Exactly.
Are there other archaeologists saying, oh, no, that rock is it just was there? I mean, are there conflicting, to kind of to Brother Clay's point, if people are digging in the dirt and they're finding all this evidence, what are the different camps? Why are there different opposing viewpoints, even amongst, scholarly,
Great question. So if there is evidence to be seen here, why are there different thoughts on the evidence we're seeing? As is commonly famously said amongst the Jewish folks, whenever you have two Jewish men, you have three opinions. And so that's no less true in the academic scholarly world as well. But I think the real heart of the answer to your question is what we have seen consistently is paradigm, point of view, perspective, your initial bias coming into this. If your initial bias is towards the Bible, are you going to immediately jump at everything that seems like it might be Bible when it might not necessarily be, if you, again, dig a little deeper? If your bias is against the Bible, are you going to immediately poo-poo anything that might be confirming the Bible versus having an honest, open? See, for me, my approach is I'm convinced the Bible is 100% accurate in every way, shape, and form. It's the most accurate science book ever written. Not the most complete, that's not its job, but it's the most accurate. It's the most accurate history book ever written. It's not the most complete history book. That's not its job or purpose, but it's accurate. And so we see in the ground, it is what it is. What we see is what we see, but it's the interpretation of the evidence. Just like when we go to Natural History Museum, you get one point of view, the evolution point of view. You don't get the biblical point of view that addresses the exact same evidence with a different answer for that evidence. And so the answer to the question is people have their biases. As shown in these films with the Red Sea crossing and the Mount Sinai journey, there are two basic schools of thought. There's the Egyptian approach and the Hebrew approach. Egyptologist David Rohl is of the Egyptian approach, where they think it's less supernatural and more natural explanations and much smaller scale. Where the Hebrew approach with Glenn Fritz, and by the way, I was just emailing back and forth with Glenn Fritz yesterday. I had a question on the cave of Elijah, and we'll get to all that when we get there. So he's been very supportive and encouraging with all of this. So there's the Hebrew approach where we take the Bible at its word and recognize these as supernatural events, and that this was not necessarily right there all close to Egypt, that looks to be further out. And so based on your school of thought, that could form a bias before you look or filter. As you're looking at evidence, you're kind of filtering it through, even though that game where the ball drops through the different things and goes down to the bottom. Well, you could be putting blockers or blinders on where you're going to allow that ball to drop based on your preconceived notions. So if we just take the blinders off, which is why I really appreciate filmmaker Timothy Mahoney, his approach is forget preconceived notions about time and place. What does the Bible say? The Bible lays out a pattern. So we see a pattern in the Bible, a flow of events or whatever. Do we see, regardless of any preconceived, do we see at any place, at any point in time, the same exact pattern as laid out in the Bible? And sure enough, we do. We just have to take the blinders off. And so that is the result of this. And so good people, intelligent people, people who love the Lord still have different conclusions, and that's fine. There's freedom, there's liberty. I have chosen to follow Glenn Fritz, not just because he's been nice, but because from what I see, his layout seems to be the best fit to what the Bible actually says. That rock is spiffy, but as he points out, that rock is over here, really too close before everything else they have to go through. They have to go through the wilderness of sin. They have to go through Dafka and Alush and come out into Rephidim before they even get to that rock. Plus, that rock's a dead end, where they come around to the backside after the Amalekites, and they come to the wilderness of Sinai over here. So everything that Glenn Fritz has pointed out on the journey seems to be the best fit for the Bible. So what I'm looking for and what I present is what is, as I mentioned last week, using Occam's razor, shave away everything that's unnecessary. The position that answers all of the criteria that has the least amount added to it to make it fit, that's the one I go with. So for others to make other things fit, they have to add a bunch of things in to stretch it and make it work. This just simply takes the Bible at face value on the ground. Here it is. It seems to be the best fit until more evidence is discovered. So is that Sister Minnie and Sister Diana? True. Yeah, if we have a great imitator who tries to lead people astray and sow confusion and doubt. See, if let's say some more evidence comes up and Dr. Glenn Fritz's route ends up being incorrect. Okay, that doesn't shake my world because that doesn't change the Bible. It just changes our understanding of the Bible. The Bible never changes. We just, every bit brings us closer and closer to it. Through these different things, I'm closer in my seeing the scriptures and they're falling into place and the evidence of it than I've ever been before. 2 years from now, I hope to be even closer as we grow and study and learn. And so it's an ongoing pursuit, but it's always with the view to bring us closer and not to be discouraged and drawn away. Sister Minnie, Diana.
I just wanted to elaborate or say something about what Brother Clay brought up about now I don't know, I understood, I heard Governor of Mecca, I also heard about the Crown Prince. Well, I guess the Korean doctor was ministering to the Crown Prince. But
yes.
He spoke with the governor to get permission to go look around in these holy places. If it is, and they are, and the government of Saudi Arabia is claiming that it's something out of the Bible. Now, I would be surprised if this can be a little bit like, yeah, let's do this, it helps tourism. There might be a little bit of that, this was together in mind. But I think your question was basically why would Muslims acknowledge Moses or Jesus? My understanding, if I'm not mistaken, they do not deny Jesus, but they say he was a prophet. So they deny him as the Messiah, but they recognize him as a prophet. Is that correct?
Yes. So thank you for that. A very important point to consider here. So this is Saudi Arabia. This, of course, is the area we're talking about here. You've got Mecca and Medina down here. Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem are the three holy sites of the religion of Islam. They make their annual pilgrimage to Mecca down here. And so the travel routes are known as the Hajj routes. And we see that the Israelites were following routes that would later be used on these Hajj routes, taking them down. But as far as the connection or the overlap, or recognition from the Muslim religion and the Quran scriptures of their religion, they all three of the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, quote unquote, and the Islamic religion, all three trace back to Abraham. Of course, we know going back to creation even further in Genesis, but And so where they shoot off from that, for example, I've shared at the time we were going through Genesis with the offering up of Isaac. Well, according to the Quran, which considers itself to be the third testament and the correction to all the human errors in the first two, it was not Isaac that was offered up. It was Ishmael. And so they've got shared at the time, looking down here at Mecca with all of that. And so the Islamic government of Saudi Arabia, yes, that Korean doctor was the personal physician to the crown prince of Mecca. And so at that time, and so he, due to his connection, was able to get some access there. But things have changed over time. As we see, especially during the time frame of these explorers in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s even, there were a lot more restrictions and there was much more clamping down because while tourism is nice, tourism for religious reasons, especially religion that might be contradicting our own, there's less tolerance for that. That might be an upset or a threat or perceived as a threat. So we're going to clamp down on claims for the Jews and the Christians that this is Mount Sinai over here with all that. We're going to, break out and I wanted to mention this too in the Q&A last Sunday afternoon. I mentioned the submachine guns being brought out. Replaying the tape of that, she actually said it was AK-47s, which technically aren't submachine guns. So I want to set the record straight there. Didn't want any gun fans to call me out on that, so I caught it. So they weren't, but yes. Semi-automatic rifles, yes. Anyway, you get the idea. But more recently, younger generation of leaders, more open and less threatened. And so there has been opportunity more recently to explore these things than there has been in the past. So.
My understanding has always been that there's so much, well, I don't know if so much is the right word, but there's a lot of evidence for the historical man Jesus that it's
absolutely
kind of hard for people to say, well, there was never any Jesus.
Right.
If you're taking that point, that's fake news, from my understanding.
Right.
But where the thing is, well, he was a real guy, but he was not the son of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was a prophet, or he was this or that, or the other. Yeah, he was Joseph's son. So that's where they deny the deity of him, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it's a lot easier to do this, do this other stuff and claim this other stuff.
Exactly.
And that was the controversy at the time, right?
Right.
That was the blasphemy.
Yep, that's Sister Minnie quoted. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's kind of hard if I'm understanding. It's kind of hard to say, no, there was no Jesus.
Can I add a commentary?
Sure.
Yeah, please.
I would definitely say that people are so, myself included, I was not educated in world history. We had almost no world history in school when I was in school. It was ridiculous.
Right.
Absolutely ridiculous. And so we have at least one generation of people more. Starting with my generation, such a vast ignorance of world history. So then because Christianity lately during my lifetime has become so less popular, less accepted, more scorned, and then it's easy for people ignorant of world history to say, what? No, there wasn't a Jesus. So they not only don't believe Jesus is the Messiah, they don't even believe he even existed, which, like you say, is completely ridiculous. There's plenty of evidence, but they never saw the evidence or read any of the history. Like I actually did hear mention somewhere that I'm not going to say it was in school, but I don't remember honestly, that there was a historian named Pliny who mentioned Jesus, and he was not a Christian.
Yeah.
And he was an ancient.
Yep.
His
Pliny the Elder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I believe it was his son who was lost in Mount Vesuvius' eruption.
Pliny the Elder is pretty well regarded.
Oh, yeah.
But see, I mean, you could tap on the shoulder anybody my age or younger and say, do you know who Pliny the Elder is? And most of them would say no.
I remember being in school and, again, decades ago, right? But you only had so many weeks to get through certain periods of time in history.
Very top level.
Yeah, anything. I mean, I remember my history books, we never got to the end of the history books, whatever it was.
No.
Leading up into Vietnam and modern history, never mind world history, So if you wanted to go any deeper, that was college courses, right? That was, you had to go into college
My history
and,
book was
yeah.
about, my textbook was
Yeah.
about this thick.
Yeah.
Less than half.
Right, yeah, exactly. There's so many things, Eric talks to me a lot because, we'll be watching his historical stuff or whatever, and I'm like, this is stuff I, never heard about, I feel so dumb or whatever, and Eric's like, no, it's just exposure. It's just what you're
Absolutely.
exposed to. So, yeah, and I was on that real quick, I was reading an article where it really talks about how for us as Americans, history for us is kind of a flyover thing. Other countries are much more embedded in their histories. Europeans and obviously people in other parts of the world, their history is so much a very present part of them. And that fascinated me because, our country just goes back, 250 odd years or however old we are.
Yeah.
But for other people from other countries, it's something that is very much a part of their, structure, and they're very, I don't know if that's just the educational system per se, or just the way that they're
Yeah.
taught in the family.
You're right there, you're right there. I just want to say, I very recently was reading something in one of our periodicals about John Dewey.
Oh, yeah.
He knows more about who John Dewey is. I'm like, did he do the Dewey Decimal System? I don't know, but he was like an educational theorist.
He was a secular humanist, atheist. I believe he was a signer of that Human Declaration. Anyway, if you aren't happy with your current public school education, blame him.
There you go. That's what I'm reading. That's what I'm reading, because Dewey was what influenced our schools, our whole educational system.
Yeah.
To go away from history and be doing other things.
Social experimentation,
Yes. Oh, yeah.
social engineering, I should say.
Like, how come in school we have social studies? In the old days, it was history.
It was history.
You had history, you didn't have social studies, you had history and geography. Now it's like, oh, social studies. And that's the John Dewey effect.
Yeah, he was quite a fan of and had been to Soviet, communist Russia. Yeah.
So that's shaped everything that we have today, and
We grew up under the thrall of them, like, that's why we have this, why I have this abysmal ignorance a lot, is because of that.
Very true.
On the East Coast, they have battlefields marked. They have museums, they have all these things that the children that grow up with. But they know more about our history than those of us who grew up out here on the West Coast. Well, what do we know? Well,
We went to a mission, whatever.
You read my mind.
Closest to us, we went there in the fourth grade.
that's a good point. Even different parts of the country, history means different things to
We're a
different
big country, but over in Europe, we have smaller countries. Those people, they have their own places where this battle was fought and that one was fought, and what's his name, the different ones that would come in, Bloody Mary and
William the Conqueror.
Yes, that I was thinking way back when, yes, that's who I was trying to think of, William Conqueror, but I didn't get it at first. It took a while to go down that right.
I figured.
All those different leaders just went in. There were the Catholics and then there were the Protestants and all these different things besides the Goths. And this was in their land, and they had landmarks, that kind of thing. So they were able to teach their children more history. There we got out here.
Yeah.
That's very good.
What's interesting about the dichotomy there, contrast and comparison between the United States of America and Europe, for example, is to this point, we have a couple hundred years of history. We're about to be celebrating our 250th anniversary in 2026. So that's going to be a very big deal. And I was just reading about the Freedom Train that went around the country in 1976. So I think that'd be great to bring that back for its 50th anniversary, but another story for another time. So we have only been around for 200 plus years as a nation. And so in California, we can look back to the missions. Yay, that's cool. On the East Coast, they can go back to, Revolutionary War stuff and all that. And earlier with the Pilgrims and all that stuff in the 1600s, that's cool. In Europe, instead of going back hundreds of years, they go back thousands of years into their culture and legacy and history and all that stuff. But here's the flip side of that. Our government's older than anything. We have the oldest government of these Western societies. Yeah. Our United States Constitution is an older document than any, and our government established by the Constitution is older than any of the governments. Yeah. The current government, Rome's now in the nation of Italy.
Oh.
The government of Italy is younger than America. The present government of all these nations is younger than the government of the United States. Oh, yeah.
They didn't have a constitution because
Yeah.
they had monarchy for all those years, and then they overthrew the monarchy. And then eventually they got around to writing something like constitution.
Yeah. Britain's current parliamentary system. And they have what's called referenced as a constitutional monarchy, but their constitution is not written.
And didn't they change every time there was a new king, new queen and stuff like that? It was never the same.
Oh yeah, and you had your histories of overthrows, Charles I and all that, and all those different
I
things.
see so many people now today trying to rewrite what we have, trying to get rid of what we have.
Oh, the French Revolution was going on during the time of Thomas Jefferson, of course, a key figure in our revolution.
He was all up in.
He was all up in that, but there was a big difference between ours and the French Revolution. Theirs was just an anarchy overthrow that just created more violence. Ours was getting back to the natural law dignity of God-given mankind. And so ours lasted, theirs didn't. And so godly versus godless direction.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Syria. Right?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Syria.
Because this might not be a good thing. I mean, depending upon who steps in fills in the gap, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And so Brother Rick Howard, pastor of Modesto Liberty Church in Modesto, sent a little thing this morning on that we'll be looking at Wednesday. And Daniel 7 and 8, that just happened to be our devotional for this morning. He referenced those. And so we'll be talking about that on Wednesday. Yeah, so all of this stuff relates. It all connects. And Sister Ashley is so right that it's not about intelligence or ability. It's about exposure. And so I only have seen what I've seen because I've looked for it. And it's there to be seen. And so as I want to say, like I say on Wednesday nights with Messianic Jewish Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, or when I talk about Egyptologist David Roll, or Dr. Glenn Fritz here, don't take any man's word or woman's word for anything. Feel free to disagree with them. Feel free to come to a different conclusion from me on these things. As has been famously said for us Landmark Missionary Baptists, landmark unity, all else liberty. So there's some landmark things we absolutely have core in common, with relations to understanding doctrines, salvation, baptism, service, and things like that. But other than that, feel free to be at different places. Give room for the Holy Spirit to lead and guide. But the main point to keep in mind with all of this is that God's word, first and foremost, is true. If we never go any further than that, we have that. But the beautiful thing is we have time and opportunity and resources to be able to discover. Again, I go back to the scientific revolution. They were glorifying God in discovery of the details of how God played out and put these things into place. I find it glorifying to God that we could read this and see this and rejoice that God did this. And again, with the Hebrew approach here to the Exodus, the sea crossing, and Mount Sinai, this is supernatural. This is what was accomplished was beyond anything coincidental or human or small scale. This was big. God moved big league, and we see the results of that. So good stuff there. We'll pick up again where we're at here in Exodus chapter 19, the first couple verses. But what we're going to be looking at is, so they've come out from the world. Al-Bad, by the way, that they mentioned there. Dr. Glenn Fritz has that as Elim from the Bible there. So all this being kind of Midian here. So here's the wilderness of Sin, which just means east. It's east of the Yam Suf Gulf of Aqaba. So they've come through, as Numbers 33 tells us, Dafka and Alush out into Rephidim, and there's the rock in Horeb from Glen Fritz. As you can see, you can already see it just from this zoom out right here. Very noticeable. It may look like a hill, as Brother Clay said, but it's actually the rock that it's made out of, and the Hebrew word for that is very unique to that area. There's not anything like it. And it's room enough for all the water to flow out here from the split rocks to accommodate all these people. So anyway, they come out, they have their battle with the Amalekites, who then go on to become the early Hyksos in Egypt in the north. And so the Israelites continue on. We talked about this turn here into the wilderness of Sinai, leaving Rephidim. All of this in the region of Horeb, which is locally known as the Pisgah, this plateau here on the backside, where Moses would be taking his flocks on a regular basis. Anyway, so he's familiar. So they make this turn, they enter here. This is the wilderness of Sinai, and here is the base of Mount Sinai that we will be heading to and going to. So as they're entering here, and then we'll go back to Exodus 18, where Jethro reunites Moses with his family there at the base of the mountain. So we'll be getting to all of that. So let's see here. So we will pick up next week looking at all of that, but there is the Mount Sinai that we will be exploring. Let me do this real quick. So there is the trail that will be coming up, we'll be taking to go up to Mount Sinai. So we will get to all that next week, but any other thoughts, comments, questions on the journey to Mount Sinai? All good? All right, enjoyed the conversation very much. We'll go ahead and stop our screen share and stop recording for now. So let's see, stop share, stop recording, and we'll get ready to go for the Lord in song here.